we want to remember that we want to always make sure we got the context of where we're at. We are in the Ephesian church age. We want to remind ourselves that we are following the church ages as they correspond to the seven churches of the Revelation. That the seven churches of the Revelation, although they had their specific topic and teaching that we can glean from each one, we do want to see the larger context that those churches are in an apocalyptic book. It's a book about the future. We shouldn't expect it to be some just arbitrary add-on that's just thrown in for good measure. As I like to say, John giving a shout out to his homies over in Asia Minor. Okay, it is more than that. There's something intentional about that, which goes along with our view of studying history, the teleological view. We want to remember that the teleological view comes from the word telos, where we get the word telescope, meaning to see far off into the future, most specifically applied to seeing the end purpose for something. And so we see from the time of the early church off into the future, we see God moving along very deliberately. Nothing is happening accidentally. Nothing is happening just as a result of social forces. It's all happening according to God's plan to bring us to the ultimate conclusion. We want to remember that it's not just that God decided that there would be a war at the end and whatever. There's something about looking at the scope of church history that speaks of God's very character of grace. And that is a big topic in a lot of churches, whichever angle you look at it, that God is gracious to establish his absolute reasonableness for doing what he's done, for having hell and for having heaven. That there would be a hell for judgment and a heaven for those who respond to him. And the idea is this, that God kept giving more and more information to be able to, one of the things was to establish, as I like to say, a paper trail of prophecies so that we could identify who the Messiah was, and that God would give mankind more and more rope, essentially, to hang himself. That with every with every dispensation, with every age, there would always be some new development, some extra responsibility, and man would always blow it. So that in the end, when you get to the end of the millennial age, that final dispensation, there's like absolutely no question. Nobody can criticize God. He has done everything. Man will have ultimately proved that he needs God, and we launch into eternity. So you see, this is a very compact, very tight perspective of what God is doing in history. So we are in that Ephesian age, and that's that early church age, and we want to remember that there's quite a bit of doctrine that we're going over, quite a bit of biblical stuff. Was what are we doing? We're establishing a baseline of theology to measure everything else that's going to go on against it. Now, having said that, you also want to remember that in our purpose, we're looking for stronger conviction. Why is it that we are believing what we do? What are the pitfalls that are out there? The average church member doesn't see this. Okay, the average church member is busy going to church in their place and in their locality, serving God, and most of us are not aware of what's going on out there in the world of theology and in the world of churches. And so they don't have a chance to get to see that so much. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of loose thinking that's out there, and a lot of it that will could possibly seem innocuous at first, but end up causing some great individual harm. One of the things that comes to mind specifically, we have people, we talk about, and one of my favorite subjects, of course, is the sovereignty of God, and where there's this idea that God has determined who's going to get saved and who's going to get lost. Now, I always like to point out, when those people talk to somebody about Christ, they try to persuade them to get saved, just like I try to persuade them to get saved. Okay, and we're doing the same thing. Okay, but if you throw this other teaching in on the side, you say, well, you could get along. Maybe that person they don't mind me putting it the way I do because they'll say, yeah, 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 you're telling people they have a choice to make, but I know that it's really God doing it, and God's already got it all determined. See, they might think that, and they might just keep their mouth shut. Or maybe I would say, hey, look, as long as you tell somebody, and I would reverse the process and say, as long as you're talking about getting saved, and you can think it's God doing it, you can think it's just the point is they're praying to get saved. Now you could leave it like that, right? And you could get along together, except for one thing. What happens is that that kind of teaching causes some people who are having doubts about their spirituality to assume that, hey, God made me the way I am. God determined that I should have this sin problem. It's his fault. And then that's bad enough, by the way, to attribute sin to God. But but probably even worse is that person lives a defeated life, saying, I was made this way, not my fault. So I might as well just continue on in my path of sin. You see where this goes? And so you can get into all kinds of errors because of sloppy thinking. One of the things I'm going to refer to in a moment here is the nature of the church. We're looking at page 69. We're looking at ecclesiology doctrines that were in effect concerning the church. It comes from ecclesia, the church, the called out ones, and ology, the study of. And so we're going to see that at the start things were very much like what Baptists are doing today. Good and bad Baptists, either one doesn't matter. They all have the same kind of polity, the same kind of organization, but that there's all kinds of different ways that people have tried to organize in their churches that can lead to some big time problems. Most specifically of good sound movements getting watered down because they are walking in the paths of unrighteousness by walking in an ecumenical way. So those things are going to come out. So the point is that there's a lot of sloppy thinking out there that seems innocuous. Doesn't seem like it's a problem until you start seeing it applied. That's why we are studying church history, for that sense of conviction, so that when we speak, we don't just say, well, No, we want to speak with conviction. Now, when I'm talking to somebody else in another church, I'm not going to get all argumentative. If somebody wanted to sit down and actually look at things, most people don't. I'm talking preachers. Okay, most preachers don't want to really sit down and examine things. But if they wanted to, we would do it. So we just leave things alone. But here in our church, and that's where this kind of thinking is most important with our sense of conviction, is that we are firm in why we are doing things. Okay, we have a rationale. Sometimes our rationale might be a little bit weaker, sometimes it might be a little bit stronger, but you have to have a rationale. Once you decide something, you stand by it. Okay, once you make the decision, um, so for instance, let me give you an example of that. Once you determine that the Bible is the Word of God, okay, and you've got lots of things that you might not understand, you have lots of things you might question, lots of things you say, I can't figure this out. The things that you can figure out, once you can say, yeah, this is of God. Okay, now you stand by it. And when you come to those other areas that are harder to figure out, then you've already got your conviction in place. This is, again, why we study this stuff, is because of the conviction that it gives us, the firmness in a sea of wishy-washy Christianity that's out there. Okay, I'm just glad stuff's going on. I'm not totally condemning of it all. I'm only partially condemning of it. Okay, the wishy-washiness. I'm glad Christ is getting talked about the way the Apostle Paul referred to in the book of Philippians. Okay, that's great. But uh, I've got to give an accounting for what I'm going to say. If I'm going to say, I'm going to have to. I want to stand by it with conviction. I remember when I was. I tell the story pretty often. When I was. Deciding that, yeah, God had called me to preach and everything. I looked at the Bible and I said, uh, there are things in here. I'm going to be claiming things from the Bible, I better make sure that I can, with conviction, say this is God's word. And it didn't take much. It was, I always tell you, it was the prophecies that did it for me. And since then, I've seen numerous preachers, say, yeah, the prophecies, that's where you go. There was Brother Joe, was Mike Winger was talking about that in another video just recently. And so once you got that, okay, I said to myself, yes, if I'm going to stand up there and say, "Thus saith the Lord," I better make sure that I believe that it's the Lord who said this. Right. So again, this is a little bit of introduction again, or a little bit reminder, a little bit by the way of review. Okay, we're looking at then page 69 on ecclesiology, and what we're looking at is the independent autonomy of each church. Independent autonomy, and I like to go a little bit extra when we go to look at defining a word. Autonomy comes from the word auto, meaning self, and nomos, which is law. Okay, nomos, or in this case, self-law or self-rule. We believe in the self-ruling of each church and not having a headquarters or a larger organization that has any opportunity to impose itself on a local church. And it is, again, independent autonomy. We are independent of other churches. So paragraph 165 says the doctrine of the church was introduced by Jesus Christ when he addressed the apostles on who they thought he was. I think that should be on whom. Yes, should be on whom they thought he was. It sounds better to say who. It's wrong though. Okay. Look at the big idea on the page. The big idea: independent churches, not a universal, was the rule. That was the rule of the day. They were all independent. This whole idea of a universal church that would grow into a Catholic church or a Greek Orthodox church, an Orthodox church that would have dominion over the other churches. This is something that's going to come, not too late, but not too early either. The local churches was the rule of the day. Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, we read, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. There's a lot in there that would be worth parsing, but we want to just point out that this idea of the church was something that is new. Christ was going to be building his church. Now, this is in view, of course, of when there will be a universal church. Okay, it will be in the millennium when Christ is the pastor of all the believers that are joined together, and you'll have a universal church then. And and the location will be on earth. Okay, it's in a location, so that will be true. But we've got to take into consideration what the very word meant. One of the rules of hermeneutics, how you interpret the scriptures, one of the rules is to take a word in its historical grammatical understanding. In other words, how it was used at the time in history, in that history period. What did they understand it to mean? What did that word mean to them? Very regularly, when you get into all these disputations, you get into all these misinterpretations and misapplications, very regularly it's because two people speaking English are not speaking the same language. Okay, people have their own definition for what they are meaning. Happens all over the place. This is why Democrats and Republicans can't get along. They use, each one has a word, and they each have a different definition for it. Liberals and cultists and fundamentalists were all talking different languages, even though it's English. And so you want to look at how did they understand it back then? Okay, so the church was a new development in this dispensation. Some people, some commentaries you'll see maybe sometime you're doing a little extra study, a little reading somewhere, and they talk about the church in the wilderness, meaning the church, the Jews wandering in the wilderness, so the church in the Old Testament. That was not a church, okay? Not a church. It was an assembly, if anything, but not the church. The word church, okay, as it was understood at the time of Christ. And by the way, that's you can tell you got a bad theologian who's not going to be a dispensationalist if they use the phrase church in the wilderness. If you ever see that, sometimes I'll refer to how I'm always listening for key words and key phrases. And if they say such and such, I'll like, I know where you're coming from. It's like, it depends on what chair you choose. Aha. So a little joke from this afternoon. Okay. Yeah, you look for you hear these phrases and you say, okay, I know where this is coming from. I know what they've been exposed to. Okay, so what did it mean to them? Well, the Jews, because of the diaspora, and you can see more about that on the footnote on page 40. We can go back and look at that. They had developed the synagogue system for prayer and study. The word synagogue is similar to the word church. But it's a different entity. Church is ecclesia, made up of the words ek, where we get the word exit from or out of, and kaleo, which is very interesting, the word call. Okay, so it is the ones who are called out. Now, they are called out of a local area. They're not just called out of the world, they're called out of a local area. That was the understanding that they had of that word in that day. Okay, it did not have religious connotations at all. And in fact, if anything, if you said the ecclesia, you thought that they were talking about the local town council having a town hall meeting to be able to handle the business of a city. And so that's what they were thinking when you said that. They weren't thinking a universal body of people called out of the world to follow Christ. No, it was a town council. That's what they were looking at. When you said synagogue, it's actually similar in concept. Comes from Greek words syn, where we get the word like symphony from. Okay, meaning with. Okay, and ago, which means to lead. So they would be led together. So they would be led together to come. And what the synagogue did was it stood in for the fact that in the diaspora, flung out all across the world, they were not near the temple. So they would have their local centers where they would gather to pray. And they would pray and read the scriptures and study together. Okay, total different kind of thing. The church was given a mission to go and convert the world. The synagogue was just it was more of a convenience thing because of being stuck out in so many places. They didn't have that sense of mission. Now, the Jews in the diaspora there was good evidence they had an understanding that they were supposed to have an impact on the world because they would have proselytes that would turn to Judaism. Remember, we had said much earlier how that the pagan religions were becoming very unsatisfactory to people. The morality, just everything about it, was not really beneficial. And Judaism, by itself, out in the diaspora, was a breath of fresh air. And so you would have proselytes, but they didn't have that sense of mission. And what did Jesus do when he got to the at the resurrection and the ascension? He gave them that commission and told them to go out into all the world. Okay, starting first at Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and then the uttermost parts of the earth. And so they had a distinct sense of mission. Okay, let me just read this through. The Jews in general knew that as a nation, they served a missionary purpose to the Gentiles. When Christ taught them that he would be building his church, he was bringing in a new concept. The idea of the church was established by the influence of the Hellenic culture, the Greek culture, to operate as a town council in the Greek free city states. We have city states today. Anybody know of some city states? I can think of three offhand. I'll bet your brother Tone would guess one of them at least. Ah, and that's not the one I thought he would guess. Okay, I didn't think of that one. Monaco, yeah. Okay, yeah. How about Singapore, right? Singapore says it's a not a country, it's a city in Malaysia that has its own operating principles, is not subject to the national laws of Malaysia. Yeah, Brother Joe. The Vatican is a city state. Washington, D.C. is a city state. Yeah. Okay, so we have this concept. Um, so a church had a business sense to it, accompanied by a mission statement. Those are very business oriented. And I always like to point out, yeah, it was a business sense, it's family business, at least, though. So the ecclesia of the free city states were independent of each other. Paragraph 167. So that there was no one church is seen in the fact that the spiritual ecclesia were identified by their locations, such as the cities of Ephesus, Colossae, and Thessalonica. And then it has the churches of the regions of Galatia and Judea. So you have the very fact that you can have a plurality of churches or a church at such and such a place is just like to them it was natural. To us it's not natural. To us we take note that to them it was natural that you had more than one church. You didn't have a universal church. Paragraph 168. The Council of Jerusalem had been called to advise the Church of Antioch on the matter of the Judaizers. And you can go back to page 61, and then you can go ahead on page 83 if you want to see more about that. They exercised no authority over the church, but only made their recommendation to them. And so, so there was no power over them. The independence of the early churches was maintained during this church age. As the next age dawned, the importance of spiritual unity became a pressure that then promoted ecclesiastical unity. So that was the pressure that was going to be resolved by trying to move to having some kind of authority that would be the authoritative source over all these things. Boy, I'll tell you, the thing that I see right away there is the tendency of man to have a centralized power. Okay, this is very directly related to the sense of communism, which the Antichrist is going to end up using to establish a one world religion. Okay, these are the philosophical elements that become the building blocks for what the Antichrist is going to use. That's why being an independent church and having autonomy has been so very vital for Baptists. This is something that Baptists have fought and died for, and being persecuted by the Universalists, especially when they were persecuted. Okay, but you can see, and what I want us to see in history, this is the benefit of studying history, is you're going to see this spiritual unity to have some kind of sense of a credentialed what's the word for when a college accreditation? Okay, a credentialed and accredited agency. Okay, people, colleges, they have accreditation. What they do is they set up a board and they say, yeah, we credential ourselves. Okay, that's essentially what's happening. It's not bad in that, if they have a lot of thought that goes into things, yeah, they will do good. But we're watching this whole idea of credentialism play out in Congress, where the congressman, they'll get somebody who come and give a testimony. It could be about parents' rights and what's going on in the schools. And the question is, and what degree do you have, ma'am? Okay, I'm a parent. Okay, I got my MRS degree. Okay, that's my degree. Okay, and you see this all the time. Well, quite frankly, one of the beefs I have with such thinking is, why are you even holding hearings? you expect to pass laws that you want people to vote for you about, okay? If you think that they're such idiots, why are they voting for you then? Okay, their vote wouldn't count. And they're like, yeah, now you're getting it. Okay, we just want to be elites that want to be put into power, and we really don't care what the people say. And we only hold these hearings to give a facade, to give it the appearance that we're actually thinking about what you or care about what you say. Okay, and that's all behind this attitude of credentialism. Okay, so yeah, so they have this pressure. It's always been around this to have some kind of authority, all ostensibly to justify, or not to justify, but to clarify doctrine. But that unity that turns into political unity, not spiritual unity, but when this turns into a political unity, that's where the problems are going to come about. Okay, I'm about to go to Rome was not established as a see of Peter. Before I do, I trust that we got some some people itching to share in this. Yes.
I, I had a question about the grammatical historical method of translating,
Interpretation.
interpretation rather. Does that apply to translations as well?
Yes.
Okay, because I was thinking of the example in Genesis where um, Noah's told to, I mean, I'm sorry, where Adam and Eve are told to replenish the earth. And we think of replenish today means to refill.
Mhm.
But at the time that
Oh, yeah,
the Bible
right.
was translated, replenish meant merely to fill.
Okay, yeah, right. That's right.
So that's why that I think a lot of people came up or give credence to the reconstruction ruin theory of creation because they see that word replenish and they think, well, something happened where the earth was filled and now it needs to be
Yeah,
refilled.
yeah.
So that would apply in that context too then.
Yes, yeah. In fact, that's really true. I would generally, even if somebody wanted to say replenishing, even in our modern sense, I would say, well, that's just referring to how that once it gets filled, we fill it some more,
Mm.
and we keep the filling going on, and so it's going to be replenished throughout time. But no, you're right. It is filled. I'd forgotten all
Mm.
about that. Yeah. Yeah, so you look at how the word was understood, even with translation, which that's one of the things I'll do. I've mentioned how I'll say a concordance, and if you ever want to get to be able to use a concordance, computer concordance, sometime I'll help you out with that. But one of the things that I'll do is I'll take they'll use Strong's numbers. Uh, Augustus Strong, I think it's Augustus was who took every word in the Bible and would give it a number so that you can look up and say, oh, it's this Greek word is used here, here, and here because not it's not translated the same way every time. It depends on the context. And what you can do is you plug it in, you can see all the ways the word was translated, which will give you a sense. That'll help you get a sense of understanding of what the word is referring to. Um, so so yeah, so the historical grammatical, how it was understood when it was written, how the translated word, how it was understood in its time. Just a side note, does anybody know the difference between ensample and example? Some people sometimes will say, "Oh yeah, ensample. That's one of those archaic words," and they just translate example. Actually, the Greek word for ensample and example, it's the same Greek word. Why they did it? Well, en means within, ex means without. I am an example to the unbeliever, but I am an ensample to the church. Same Greek word, but when they translated it, that's why they did that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So words are great. Okay. Words as one of my favorite radio hosts used to say, words mean things. Okay. Words mean things.
The Greek language superior to the English language.
No, I would say that the English language is superior in that it's richer. Okay, the Greek language was superior in its day for the fact that um, it was like a language that you could build words with. Okay, they had the prefixes, suffixes, roots, and different aspects, prepositions, how a preposition was used with, okay, short lesson in Greek. Okay, we will conjugate verbs, right? Okay, I go, you go, he goes, we go, you go, you all go, they go. Okay, I went, you went. Okay, and so we can conjugate that way, right? They did the same thing with nouns. Nouns could have I think it's about eight or nine endings that could be on the noun that would flavor the noun. A preposition used with a noun this one way, one of the endings would indicate possession, like the word his. His is a possessive pronoun. Okay, him is an, give it to him, objective pronoun. He is nominative. Okay, it's used for naming. Well, Greek has several more endings that are possible, and a preposition would change its meaning depending on what the ending of that noun was. Not all the time, but in significant places. So Greek allowed you to do this kind of thing. Why I think of English differently is because English draws from a number of sources, and our vocabulary is much bigger today than, Joe, you might know. I'm thinking, do you ever remember reading somewhere about English before Elizabethan times, let's say in the days of Chaucer? The vocabulary was smaller, I'm thinking. I'm trying to think. That's a study all by itself, the development of the English language. So it's much more powerful. And I always like to point out the fun time I had when I asked you years and years ago. We were talking about, I said, there are so many words we get from so many languages, but I cannot think of anything that we might get from the Philippines. Brother Tone looked at me just with a straight face and just matter of factly, boondocks. I thought, oh, okay, never knew that, and then I think we came up with a few more besides from that. But yeah, so I would say English is about the best language because it has that aspect of building, and then it's got the richness to draw from, so you get a greater connotation. Okay, sometimes when I'll look up things, I'll say I'll do a query that will say, can you give me something with a negative connotation? Okay, and you'll get something, you could say red, you could say bloody, you could say crimson, right? Okay. Now, if I said bloody, that has one connotation. Red is like neutral, crimson is like, much richer kind of thing. Maroon, say, a whole bunch of things we could say. So yeah, so I like English real good. I'm glad I got stuck in America so I could learn English.
Before it used to be French diplomatic language,
Yes.
it has become English.
Yeah. And if some had their way, it would become Mandarin, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Brother Tone didn't have the microphone. He said French was the diplomatic language. More people spoke French in Russia in the government than they did Russian, and because of the influence of Napoleon and others as well. Okay, now that's where you get lingua franca from. Okay, the common language, the French language. Okay, no, now it's English, and I was saying, yeah, and superseded by English. And if a certain country had their way, it would be Mandarin. They're working on it. I think in the UN, one of the languages you're required to be able to speak is Mandarin. I think I heard that one time. Besides English, yeah, Brother Joe.
Yeah, I guess that's God and his providence. England, of course, being a world power and spreading its culture around the world, through colonial endeavors and others. And then, of course, the United States coming to power later. Mandarin or Chinese in general is the most spoken language in the world, but English is the most widely spoken language in the world.
Okay.
And it's still considered to be the international language of business.
Mm-hmm.
And even in airports, any personnel who have anything to do with flights, whether it be the control tower or the pilots, they have to speak English.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, looking at paragraph 170. I don't want to go through this section a little bit quick because I would like to be able to do the next section as well. Okay, Rome was not established as the see of Peter and the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. There was no biblical evidence that Peter was actually ever in Rome. Okay, Paul, at the end of the book of Romans, explains that he hoped to go to Rome to work there, but would not have done so in a place where someone else had already laid a foundation. So Peter did not precede Paul. Romans 15, verses 20 to 24, he says, Yea, so how I strived to preach the gospel, not where Christ was named, lest I should build upon another man's foundation. But as it is written, to whom he was not spoken of, they shall see, and they that have not heard shall understand. For which cause also I have been much hindered from coming to you. But now, having no more place in these parts, and having a great desire these many years to come unto you, whensoever I take my journey into Spain, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey, and to be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first I be somewhat filled with your company. Now, Peter had evidently ministered as the apostle to the Jews, the circumcision in the East, as has been mentioned before, where there was a significant Jewish diaspora presence. There's no reason that his reference to greetings from the church at Babylon was code language for Rome. That is an assumption. Okay, if they found somebody who said, "Oh, I was a code language for Rome at one time," yeah. Well, when you look at Peter and he lists the cities that he was reaching out to and responding to, and he lists Babylon, why would he have all these eastern cities and use their cities' names, and then include a western city as a code? You know, by calling it Babylon. No, he had there's no evidence that he ministered in that area. He was used as a transition, as a connection, as a link towards getting the gospel to the Gentiles, as we preached not too long ago, last week, from Romans chapter 15, but he was not the first bishop there. Okay, Brother Tone, yes, microphone for Brother Tone.
Yeah, if we examine the three letters of Paul, of Peter, no, three,
Yeah, two,
yeah,
3 Johns, 2
yeah,
Peters, yeah.
to Peter. He addressed his letters to Jews,
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
all the dispersion.
exactly.
Yeah, so if he were the first pope, the first letter would have been addressed to the
Yeah.
church in
Yeah.
Rome, his seat.
Yeah. Yeah. When you read Peter, if you keep in mind that there's a Jewish context there, it will help you see better what he's talking about.
Although, and then he also warned in Second Peter chapter 15, no, chapter 3, verse 15, that what Paul was writing was scripture, and therefore therefore they should better study it as they should, and not bring in their own ideas and pervert things.
Yes.
So, in other words, I think he would be affirming that Paul, in fact, did visit Rome first.
Exactly. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Okay. Now there is a historical record to this. Looking at paragraph 172, we have Irenaeus or Irenaeus, and up on the screen you can see him on the timeline here. Come on, timeline. There you go. Irenaeus here. And we're talking 130. This is after the Ephesian age. Okay. Irenaeus, Eusebius, Tertullian, all will have a record that really discredits the idea of Peter being the first pope. So Irenaeus, in his work Against Heresies, which was written about 180 AD, mentions Linus as the first successor of Peter in the episcopal office in Rome, but he states that Linus was ordained by Paul and Peter jointly. So you still see from Irenaeus here the aspect of Paul being there. Eusebius of Caesarea, now we're talking 260 or 168 years, or at least 160 years after after the Ephesian age, in his ecclesiastical history written in the early 4th century, also records the tradition that Linus was ordained by Paul as the first bishop of Rome. Tertullian, we're talking 155 to 240 AD, in his prescription against the heretics, written about 200 AD, mentions that Linus was appointed by Paul as the first bishop of Rome. He also referred to Peter ordaining Clement as the third bishop for the church at Rome, but he does not suggest that he did so as its pastor. He did not suggest that Peter was the pastor at that time to do that. Okay, so you've got this historical context. There's no real historical evidence that Peter was there at Rome or even as its first pastor. Now, I use the word pastor advisedly there because somebody would say, "Oh yes, he was the first pastor, the first bishop, the first pope." Yeah. No. If Paul was the pastor there, he was not a pope. He would be just a pastor. We're going to be looking at where the idea of the papacy came from. When did the papacy get established? When did you really have a first pope? That's coming up. Not too quickly, unfortunately, but it's coming up soon. It's going to start to come up. Well, no, I mean, in our studies, it's going to come up. Okay. Well, no, before then, they're going to start bringing the idea in. Some very interesting stuff. In fact, we're going to look at comments about the mystery religions right now, but we'll have much more to say about the mystery religions and the establishment of a pope. That will come later on. Right now, when I look at paragraph 174. When I look at paragraph 174 about the mystery religions, we're talking about the pressure that was on them to conform. There was this pagan culture, and it was not so uniform, the mystery religions. Different localities would have their version of the mystery religions. That's why you'll find in the pantheons of different people groups, they will roughly correspond to each other, even though they might use a different name, Zeus and Jupiter. Okay, so Mercury and Mars might be a little bit different, but they correspond to the same figures. So you had this worldwide influence of the common mystery religion elements that were in competition with Christianity. Although the pressure to be adopted would come later in the Pergamus age of the church, the conflict was already manifest, specifically present in Ephesus when Paul first appeared there. I am not going to read this particular scripture. Okay, it's a good page long there. Let me have you read that later on, but this is where Paul is. He goes to Ephesus, and Ephesus was like a chief center in Asia Minor for the mystery religions, and you had Diana was the great goddess there, and that she was known from all over, and his preaching disturbed their business concerning her. Okay. And then you had this pressure on them to conform. This is why the Christians were called atheists at first, was because they did not adopt these pagan religions. So there's always going to be this idea of trying to get the Christians to join in as just one other group in the area. No, Christianity was exclusive. So paragraph 175 on page 72 now, you also had the imperial cult. Now, think political organizational pressure. I don't mean political pressure, but the organizational mindset of the pagan world was ripe for a religious head. Part of it was by this imperial cult, the cult of the emperor. Not only did the pagan mystery religions compete with Christianity, there was also the cult of Caesar. The cult of Caesar was also known as the imperial cult. It was a form of religious veneration and deification of the Roman emperor. It emerged during the early Roman Empire. The cult of Caesar primarily involved the deification of the Roman emperor after his death. This deification of the emperor created a strong association between the ruler and divine authority. Can you see where this is going to be headed? Because the Pope is going to look for having divine authority and to be a ruler. This was reinforcing the idea of imperial power and the emperor's status as the supreme leader. Again, the Pope is going to be adopting this as you get the Romanized church. The head of somebody's going to want to be the head of the church the way that the emperor was the head of the pagan religion. The cult of Caesar was not just a religious phenomenon, it had a strong political aspect as well. Paying homage to the emperor as a divine figure was considered an expression of loyalty to the Roman state. So, when you're going to have the state church, then you want to pay homage to the head of the state church, because now what you were doing is you were declaring your allegiance to the state. You could be looked as a traitor. That's going to plague the church all the way down into the Reformation. That's going to be a big deal. This is why Baptists really are going to end up catching fire, is because when they would baptize somebody the real way, who had been baptized as an infant, they were not only doing a religious act, it was a traitorous act. It was saying that the people were rejecting their infant baptism and their state citizenship. That's the sense that it had. So it served to promote unity among the diverse territories and peoples under Roman rule by fostering a shared reverence for the emperor and the state. Especially the reverence for the state will be familiar in the medieval church. That's going to be such a big deal. Reverence for the state. Paragraph 179. Christians' refusal to participate in the imperial cult often led to persecution and hostility from Roman authorities and fellow citizens, as it was seen as a rejection of civic duty and a threat to social cohesion. This effect was actually also felt by pagan religions. This kind of reminds me of in our day that trying to think how to express it. Let me hold on to that thought. Let me come back to that in a little minute if I can. Let's just continue here. The spread of the imperial cult sometimes clashed with local religious traditions in the provinces. So you see, this pressure was on even some of the lesser pagan religions. In some regions, local deities were incorporated into the imperial cult, leading to syncretism, the merging of religious beliefs and practices. That is an important concept there, syncretism, where you have these different religious entities, or it could be other entities too, growing together and adopting each other's ways. And so that kind of pressure is going to be on. We're having that pressure today. Joe, think about Chrislam in just a moment to explain that a little bit to people. But you have this effort to try to join these things together. I thought it was really very interesting at Davos, that great globalist meeting. They had somebody, I don't know where the person was from, the World Economic Forum, and some lady came out. She was painted red, a triangle there, and she was doing a cough blessing. And she did her mumbo jumbo for a while. Then she went over to each of the leaders. I don't know who was more stupid, the person giving the cough blessing or the person receiving it. And they would dutifully lean forward and she would cough on their forehead. And I've said, you have all these different religions with all these different regalia. You've got the priests that will wear their robes, and then you get some of the Orthodox guys, and they have their getup. I've said, we as Baptists, we ought to get something that we wear. I think epaulets, on the shoulders. I think pastors ought to wear epaulets, and then they can dye it. Would that be great? Or how about a nice wide brim sombrero with the hole cut out the top? Because we're trying to get it's like an antenna, channeling in the prayers of God or something. I don't know. Okay, yeah. Syncretism, trying to bring all these things together. Okay, the influence the influence of the cult of Caesar was particularly strong in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire, including areas where early Christianity was taking root. It was not so favored in Rome itself. For the Roman citizens, they weren't crazy about this idea. They didn't like having one of their own having power over them. The imperial cult was actually more popular outside of Rome. Okay, so in these regions, it made it even more challenging for Christians to maintain their distinct identity and practice their faith freely. Now, this paragraph 180, I'm going to close with. Paragraph 180. Rome's motto concerning competition which with the later church could be, if you can't get them to join you, join them and take over. That's what's going to end up happening. That's, all this pressure from for the Christians to try to get them to join in with the mystery religions and not fight them. All the pressure from the imperial cult. It's going to be resolved by Constantine saying basically, okay, fine. So we're all going to join you. We're going to flood your church, and then we'll just take over from inside. So beware of that. Joe, I'm going to give you a chance to share about Chrislam for a moment, because I know you're real familiar with some of that stuff. Probably do this off the top of your head, I trust.
Well, not so much with Chrislam, but I know that it's part of the ecumenical movement where they're trying to merge religions together, and there are a number of people who would propose that the God of Christianity is the same as the God of Islam, but this is patently false.
Yeah.
In Christianity, obviously, we believe that Jesus is God the Son, the second part of the triune God, and Islam would refute that. Islam would say that Jesus was a prophet and a man, but no more than that. And although he did have special favor with God, he was not God himself. But there are people who would claim that we all and we all worship the same God. But actually, the origins of the expression Chrislam was actually a fictional religion that was put together by G.K. Chesterton in the early part of the 20th century. But I think that some people have picked up that name and used it to say that, that Christianity and Islam are basically the same, and that, but if you take a look at some of the superficial elements of Christianity and Islam, just like with any religion, you can find commonality there. There's some morality that will be shared. Christianity and Islam are they claim to be monotheistic, although if you look at Islam more carefully, you realize that they're actually polytheistic in what they believe, because they have Allah is not the only eternal entity. We also have the speech of Allah and the spirit of Allah, which sounds a whole lot like the
Father,
Trinity.
Word, and Spirit.
Yeah, except that since they don't believe in the Trinity, that would mean that they're separate eternal entities, which therefore means polytheism.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me ask this. I'm going to summarize things in just a moment for today. Is there anything else somebody would like to ask about or share about? Anything from?
Yes, Pastor.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yeah, to the point of man always trying to centralize power, it occurred to me that after the flood, when they tried to build the Tower of Babel, after having gone through the flood, they made sure to put pitch all over it, just in case God wanted to send a lot of rain and water again.
Yeah.
But God, once again, showing them he is sovereign, confused their languages and caused them to spread out and have borders.
Yes. Yes.
Then
Yes,
even
indeed.
later in the early church, the Jerusalem church was getting enormous. And God specifically told them in Acts 1:8 that he wanted them to be witnesses first in Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, and then to the uttermost part of the earth, getting further and further out. And they really weren't doing that. So he sent persecution to spread them out.
Yeah.
We see this coming at the end times. People are trying to have everything centralized and erase borders and have a one world government, a one world religion, a one world economic system. And God, once again, is just going to destroy all of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mankind keeps trying to do that with his power grabbing, centralized authority, and God will always defeat it.
Amen. Amen. In fact, I'm thinking of the Apostle Paul sort of had double duty. He first persecuted the church and got them to spread. Then he became saved, and then he went there to them. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Somebody else. Miss Maria, yes. Give her a microphone. Make sure it's on. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just curious. I'm wondering if
Move to the left or right a little bit.
okay.
Good. That's fine.
I'm just wondering if somehow Linus the Peanuts character has maybe by any chance got named after Linus the Great Successor, being that the Peanuts cartoon always gave out a Christian kind of message.
I never heard anything in that regard. Um, I'm just going to count that Charles Schulz thought the name Linus was cute.
Oh,
I'm going to
okay.
assume that.
Yeah, I'm just
But no, I never
curious.
heard any connections made that way.
Yeah, I'm just, wondering because, that cartoon always gave out a Christian type
Yeah.
of message.
Yeah, there was nice aspects to that.
Okay.
Okay, somebody else? Okay, then. Let me point out then that, and then we're talking about, this is talking about church formation, which is probably one of the more the more significant things that we're going to be looking at over the course of time is how the church operated and how it was organized. That's going to be a big thing. The doctrine is one thing, but how it was organized and carried out its business. You had this spiritual pressure for unity. You had the cultural pressure for people's understanding of a head for everything. And so these are the factors that are going to come to play in our next church age. Okay. Yeah, Brother Tone, go ahead. A microphone for Brother Tone.
Antioch was a Christian church, but not started by any Jew. It was started by Gentiles themselves.
I can't remember. Antioch. How did Antioch get established? Let's go ahead. Go ahead and share your thought there.
Yeah,
And
because
we'll take your word for it until we check it.
because even if after the persecution, as Miss Nancy said, none of the 12, none of the 11 or 12, including Matthias, really went out of Israel. They just stayed in Jerusalem in the mistaken notion that the kingdom was coming and that they have to be present. The 12,
Yeah.
as of apostles didn't have
They-
a concept, of the age of grace, Pastor. They were following the timeline of Psalm 2. There's a gap between the crucifixion and the tribulation.
Okay. I will say that they did. They might not have expressed it the same way that we do. Okay. They had they let some of their cultural prejudices influence them at first. But they would have to have had some sense of the age of grace on account of, though they were expecting, they'd been told often enough that Christ was not exactly going to be setting up his kingdom right then, but then after Pentecost, I'm sorry, not after Pentecost, before Pentecost, when he departed from them, they were told explicitly not to be looking for the kingdom to be established at that time. So they would have had a clue from that alone that the reestablishment of David's kingdom they were told explicitly, no, Christ will come back in his time in the clouds, he'll return again. But that no, he was not establishing his kingdom at that time. So if they didn't call it age of grace, they knew that the kingdom, that they were being rebuked essentially, or at least reproved for trying to find out, how about now? So now we got the kingdom now. Until no, we're not having the kingdom right now. I'll come back sometime. So and I think they probably figured out pretty quickly, okay, as they started going through the persecution, that things were going to be dragging out. So I would say they
Yeah,
had an
because
understanding of it.
I just think that, but if you go over the book of Acts, it was only when God called Paul in the road to Damascus and was appointed the apostle to the Gentiles that the concept even of the missionary effort towards the Western world was started. And after the conversion of Paul, there's hardly a mention of Peter, not until after the Jerusalem Council meeting, whereby they resolved the issue of Judaizers in Christian churches.
I think that's where they articulated it. It's not that they didn't know this. In fact, there was resistance to that idea. In fact, I'm looking at Acts chapter 8, and this is before Cornelius. You've got, let me see. I'll go to, okay, Philip went down from Jerusalem unto Gaza. He meets up with this Ethiopian, okay, definitely not a Jew. And he's dealing with him, and he goes on his way. But then I'm looking at how Philip then went. Where did Philip then go to? Let me see. And then Philip goes down to Azotus after that, and he's going into all the cities until he comes to Caesarea. Yeah, there's mission work going on. I think it was just the general proclivity towards bigotry that made it look like it was still essentially a Jewish thing. It was not a theological thing. It was that that they had to be shaken to realize what they were looking at. Then we see one more thing here. Okay, yeah. Earlier than that, when Saul was persecuting the church, Philip, after the death of Stephen, Philip went down to the city of Samaria and preached Christ unto them. So they definitely had this idea that it was not, they should have had the idea. They could have had the idea. Just by Philip's ministry alone was not really to Jews, it was to Gentile peoples, the places that he went. And then again, with the Ethiopian being a great example of that. So yeah, so it's more like the popularization and having become the common understanding. It was not theological, it was just ethnic prejudice that I think that was in effect that they were overcoming. Not was the nature of the church changing, or was the nature of the age changing, was the nature of their hearts changing and their perceptions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Pastor. And to the credit of Peter, he also he opened book of Acts, and that was the first key to the Jews.
Yeah.
And then Philip, while Philip and the others did not bring about the baptism of the Holy Spirit when they preached there, it took Peter to be able to do that. And then he opened the door also to the Gentiles with his ministry to the Cornelius in
Yeah.
chapter 10.
Yeah, and that to me is like it's like I think, as I mentioned, I think maybe it was the last week or the week before, Peter was merely the connecting link. He was the linchpin, but that it went on from there. Now, the reason why we got to be careful is because some of this is where you start getting into the hyper dispensationalism, where they want to try to break things down within the book of Acts, and where they will. And one of the problems when you start down that road is that the hyper dispensation will then take that and say baptism is not necessary for today, that was a Jewish thing. And I'm like, yeah, no. Okay, you're wrong.
But Peter would warn them himself.
Peter would have warned them
He
himself,
was
yeah.
martyred, yeah. So everything that Paul said is scripture.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.